Today we begin a new series, and in this series we're actually addressing, it's going to be based on money, but we are also addressing some of the enemies of this, which we consider one of the best resources that God has given us. You know, it's very interesting that whenever we think about money, we have very varied opinions, about that. And we want to specifically address the things that trap us in such a way that we are not able to maximize on the opportunities that we have with this resource that is money. So I'm going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the usual stuff, saving, investing, giving. But beyond that, we want to look beyond that and see, we want to address fear. We want to talk about fear and how fear affects our giving. We want to talk about, impatience and how that affects our savings. We want to talk about even, ignorance and how that affects our investing. This is the conversation that we are going to be going through this entire month. And my belief is that many of us will be set free here, even as we learn more about how we can be great stewards of this resource that God has given us. And today I want to begin by talking about debt. Okay, I want to start by talking about debt. And my question to us is, in fact, I want to ask a very interesting question. Have you ever actually sat and thought about the things that you love about our continent, Africa? Have you ever thought about that? What are some of the things that you think you love about the continent, Africa? It's interesting. I was thinking about this just during the week, and I'm like, rarely do we sit and think about what are the things that I love about Kenya? What are the things I love about our continent? We always lean towards the things that we don't like or we don't love. But how many of us will agree with me that the shape of Africa is like the best the world over? How many of us will just agree? The shape of our continent, I'm not even judging the other continents, maybe I am. But the shape of our continent has character. Do you agree with me? The shape of our continent is magnificent. And every time I look at it on the atlas, I'm like, I'm proud to be African, just because of the shape. Anyway, maybe some of us will just say that that's very superficial. But anyway, I'm proud of that. The fact that it's the second largest continent in the world. We have the longest river. Some of us have forgotten geography. We have the longest river in the world in our continent, Africa. And there are many things to love about Africa. Did you know? In fact, I was reading on this. I don't even know. Some of those geography experts can clarify this. But did you know that the Sahara desert is probably the same size as North America? Did you know that? In terms of size. It's so big, and it's interesting how whenever you look at the map of the world on the atlas or whatever it is or online, they make Africa look like it's the same size as all the other continents, right? I'm not trying to raise a revolution against the other continents. That's not what I'm trying. I'm just trying to make us to be proud of our continent. But Africa is huge. It is huge as a continent. But beyond that, what about the minerals in Africa? Did you even know that Africa is the largest mineral industry in the world? We don't know. You guys are looking at me like you have no idea what I'm talking about. With minerals such as bauxite. Do you even know what bauxite is? Bauxite is the main source of aluminium. Sufurias you use in your kitchen? Are we together up to that point? It's interesting. Minerals, things like gold that we know, diamond. Oh, you guys don't use sufurias? I'm sorry. We have things like gold. We have things like diamond. We have platinum. We have. In fact, I was reading the other one. I think was cobalt. Cobalt. I don't even know how you explain it, but I think it is used to make metal. We have cement. We have uranium, minerals in this continent of Africa, and the most recent discovery of vibranium in our newest country. I think the 56th country, depending on what Morocco decides, but the 56th country in Africa, and that is Wakanda forever. We are a blessed continent. We have blessed nations as Africa, but yet with all these minerals that are associated with wealth, Africa still populates heavily the list of the poorest countries in the world. Read on any research and you'll find that Africa, the African countries actually populate heavily the list of those poorest countries. And you wonder why the continent that has the potential to be the richest continent in the world because of the minerals that, we even have petroleum. One of the things that has made the Middle East very wealthy and economically healthy is the fact that, yes, petroleum, oil is one of those, but we have this in Africa, and yet we still have some of those countries that produce petroleum languishing in poverty. So why is it that a continent like this that has the potential to become one of the richest is still one of the poorest? And I'm sure we all have very strong and varied opinions. Some of us will say, you know what, it's the slave trade that happens hundreds of years ago. Some of us will even say that maybe it's the colonialism. Others will even go ahead and say it's the leadership or lack thereof in this continent. Others will say it's a greedy countrymen and countrywomen who are just selfishly focusing on getting themselves to success regardless of who they get rid of or they take advantage along the way. And you know what? In all our varied opinions, we'll probably be right. That all these things have contributed to where we are as a continent in Africa. And it feels like as we go along, as the years go by, it's becoming worse and worse. I mean, some of us have had the privilege of traveling to different countries in this continent. And you've seen the poverty and you wonder. I mean, take for instance a country like the Congo, which is the second largest country in this continent, but also, which in my opinion, probably the richest when it comes to minerals. But when you look at the poverty in that country, you wonder. We've heard of countries where almost half the population are living in poverty, where they cannot even afford 2 meals a day, let alone even 3. In fact, maybe this is too far-fetched for us. Let me bring it closer home. The other day, there was a feature on TV. I don't know how many of us watched this, but there was a feature on TV about this family in Ukambani that only has 1 meal a day. Not because there is no food, but because they cannot afford to have 2 square meals, let alone 3. Ukambani, here. You know, a few years back, 1,000 bob will probably take you for 2 or 3 weeks. Now, if you even go for 4 days, lucky you, you're probably a very good money spender. 1,000 bob has become just insignificant in our lives. And then if you come to us, you know, those of us who consider ourselves middle class, okay, maybe upper, lower, you know, because some of us still don't consider ourselves a middle class. You know, we operate on a tight budget. And the thing that is consistent is that you're always having more month at the end of your money. That has been consistent. And you're barely trying to make ends meet. In fact, your ends don't even know how the other looks like because they have never met. And you're always struggling to make ends meet. You know, and then if it wasn't bad enough, the lawmakers of this country decided to go and increase your expenses by 8%. Upende usi? Pende. And all you're left to do is call on your ancestors because you're about to lose it. You're about to go bananas because the demands and the responsibilities are way beyond what your income can be able to supply. I mean, our purchasing power now has significantly reduced, and it's affecting businesses, which is affecting our economy. I mean, getting jobs right now has become difficult. I don't know how many of us will agree with me. And then it feels like those who have jobs are the ones who are getting jobs. It's like it's just rotating amongst the people who have jobs. And if you're not in the job market right now, pole sana. You know, and then everyone else is in a side hustle. So you're no longer making the kind of money that you used to make before, because now everyone wants a piece of the cake. And in seasons like this in life, many of us are left in despair. Many of us are left in hopelessness. Those of us who have a relationship with God, we come to a church, we come to a place like this, and you pray to God, and you're hoping that He will come through for you. He will answer your prayers. But then when the answer takes very long, what do? And you begin to look at gambling, because according to you, you are thinking, hey, if I can bet and win 25 million shillings, or even the jackpot 200 million shillings, you begin to see how that will solve your problems, right? I mean, all I just need to do is bet. What is morally wrong with that? Because your situation is calling for you for a miracle. And I don't even know how many of us are feeling me here, because maybe some of us are looking at me and like, yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about. But this is also my story. This is our story, because even for my wife and I, our obligation is not just to our children. Some of us live in families where your obligation is even to your siblings and to your parents. And you look at your income, and you look at the demands that these obligations have, and you're like, I can't make it. I can't make it. I don't know how many of us, this is our story. But for many of us, this is where we are. This is where we are. You look at where you are right now and where you want to go, and your head hangs with discontent. You almost want to give up. You have dreams and you have ambitions that you want to live before you exit this earth. You have that land that you wanted to buy so that you can put up something, an investment for your children. You probably have that house that you wanted to live in. You probably have that car that you wanted to drive before you leave this earth. The schools that you want to go to, or even you want to take your children to. And all these are the demands that are being made on you and your income, your meager income. You know, many of us wanted to invest in many things, but every day gone could be, or could feel like a day farther from your dream, because your reality is telling you something different. Every day you wake up and you're probably sleeping with despair. But then also, even as we're here, I realize that there's some of us who are in a much dire situation. Maybe for you, you were handed, maybe your loved one passed on, and you were handed these debts, or the business was crippled, and you didn't even know. Or maybe for you, you are here and a loved one is sick in the hospital. And now you don't even know what to do because they require some form of specialized treatment. And if nothing is done right now, you probably lose them. So we get into a problem-solving mode. What do we do? These are the truths that we are grappling with. And we start businesses because we want to earn a few more coins. You know, some of us, you know, we get to the place where we submit tenders because according to this country, you know, for you to be a tenderpreneur, that's the only way you make money. And when the answer is not coming fast enough, what do? Some of us get into stealing. And stealing, robbery with violence or robbery without violence, the corruption that we see in this country. You know, and there's a lot of stealing that is going on. But majority of us, what we do is that we decide to go the safer route, quote unquote, and we borrow. We borrow from our friends. We borrow from financial institutions, you know, because we have to cover the deficit. We borrow from our future to finance our present. And after all, life is too short. You don't even know. You're not even sure whether you'll be here tomorrow. Life is not a rehearsal. You only live once. So what do? We go ahead and make loan applications to banks and to friends. Some of us, you know, we give our logbooks to Shylocks in exchange of cash. Then those of us, the few of us who can afford to apply for mortgages, we go ahead and apply for that. But then even when you get the mortgages, you keep on refinancing because you need more money. Even as you continue, you need more money every day. And the reality is that as you look at your life, you know, you're convinced that there's absolutely no way that you will make it to where you want to be without borrowing. How? How will you make it in life? I mean, it will probably take you 40 years of saving for you to buy a house in cash. By that time, you'll be dead. It will probably take you about 5 years at least for you to buy a car in cash. And this is the truth that we are grappling with. And time is not on our side. It is not. So borrowing makes sense. Getting into debt makes sense. Let me use other people's money to meet my need for now. After all, it is not even a sin. The Bible doesn't call it a sin. It is not a sin to borrow. In fact, there are some of us who have used debt and they have succeeded. So as we talk about debt today, this is the reality that many of us are grappling with. And at times, you know, we have wondered whether what we are doing is right. I have met with Christ followers and they're asking, you know, I don't even know whether what I'm doing is right. Is borrowing the right thing, you know, engaging in this debt, is that the right thing? And even though it is not categorized as a sin, is that the right thing for us to do? And as I look for answers to those questions, you know, what I find in the Bible is a strong caution. I find a very strong warning from one of the wealthiest men. And I believe that he has the authority to speak on this subject because he's the wealthiest man who ever lived. I mean, King Solomon, when you read his stories, there's no one who can match him up to right now. And you know what? He was the wealthiest man who ever lived, but also one of the wisest men who ever lived. And you find this in Proverbs 22:7 because it says it's the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Now, many of us have heard this. This is not new to us. You probably even have heard it taught on this platform here. And I want you to remember this warning because what does being a slave mean? Because a slave is a person who is the legal property of another and is forced to obey them. That is who a slave is. It means that someone else controls you. Someone else is pulling the strings. Someone else is calling the shot. And maybe that's a good point for us to pause and find out. Who is really in control of your life? Is it God? Is it you? Or is it your lender? And I hope as I unpack this message, that answer will come true for you. Because being a slave means that you have a master who determines when you wake up, what you do during the day, what you eat, where you sleep, what time you sleep. That's what the master does. The borrower is slave to the lender. You cannot move from the house you live in because you cannot afford any other thing. They determine, the kind of house that you're going to live in or that you will afford. You cannot even leave your job regardless of the kind of pain that you're going through in that place because, in fact, if you're even to jump ship, it can only be moving up, regardless of what the culture you find on the other side, because you have to be consistent in the repayments back to your lender. Those who have borrowed from financial institutions, you know what I'm talking about. And you know that we have little say on when they decide to cut off, their lump sum, from your income. You have little say. In fact, they don't even consult you when they are increasing what they call interest rate. They don't consult you, right? Their actions determine your level of stress and even how well you sleep. They determine how well you live your life. In fact, for some of us, our pulse rate goes up whenever we see that SMS or that email from them. Because you're like, oh my goodness, no, it is not the time again. When they answer, when your lender calls you, you answer. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You will respond to whatever it is. In fact, you will make a way to get where they are. And when you default, they will send random people to your house in the name of debt collectors and auctioneers. And they will come in. If you're a country, foreigners will determine how much you tax your citizens. Foreign laborers will build your roads and your railways. Let me leave it there. I'll come back to it. So the evidence is all around us that the borrower is slave to the lender. It is everywhere you look around, even in your life. If you begin to inspect that, yes, the borrower is slave to the lender. So maybe the question that many of us have even to this place, in this place, is, so Pastor, what does it mean then? Should we not? Are you saying that we should not borrow? Is that what you're saying? And I'm saying no. That's not what I'm saying with this message. And please listen to me very clearly. Because Solomon, with those subtle words, I don't know how many words, probably 12 or 14 words. Solomon, with those subtle words, what he does here is that he gives a very strong warning. He's giving us a strong warning. But even what I want us to do today is that to take us one step back and say, before even you borrow, consider carefully your thoughts. Before you borrow, consider the circumstances around why you need to borrow. Consider carefully every decision that you're making that will lead you to that place where you're borrowing. Because when you borrow, here are some questions that you can ask. Do you have the ability to repay the loan? That's a good question. Will your income allow you to make regular payments? Or will the investment even pay itself back? That's a question that you need to ask. Another question is, what are the circumstances surrounding your borrowing? Why are you borrowing in the first place? Do you really have to borrow for that thing, or are there other options? And even, what if you borrowed and then it doesn't work out? Do you have a plan to keep repaying the lender? Another question for me is, have you exhausted all options? These are just questions that you need to ask yourself, and maybe go and sit down and ask, what else have I done for this? What else have I tried? And many of us are sitting here, and this is something that we also, as the Mavuno leadership, have also grappled with. Some of us are aware that yes, we did take a mortgage when we were moving Mavuno Bellevue from its former location to Hill City where it was. And these are some of the questions that we asked ourselves. Because do we have the ability to repay the loan? The reason why we got into the mortgage was because many of us even got to the place where they pledged. And many have honored their pledges, but still many haven't. And we were borrowing the mortgage based on the pledges that the people had made. That these are men and women of faith who are believing and trusting in God. And we did that. So we asked ourselves, what are the circumstances surrounding our borrowing? The reality, those of us who were there knew that the landlord was about to kick us out. And that community will not have been in existence So these were questions we asked ourselves. And then when you look at the vision and the mission that God had given us, souls were at stake, lives were at stake, transformation was at stake. Then you continue, the next question, have you exhausted all other options? We had a team that was working tirelessly day and night to see what other options are there. Now, in hindsight, many other options have opened up because, life doesn't remain the same. Many things change. And when we look back, we can be able to say, yeah, maybe here we can do things differently. Maybe here we can do things differently. And that's a reality. But even for you, you'll find that even as you look back in your life, you will see many options. But this is a good place for you to begin this conversation and learn one another. Carefully consider your thoughts before you willingly make yourself a slave to the lender. Before you go and give your hands, for them to be cuffed by the lender. The borrower is slave to the lender. You see, the Bible does not say that thou shalt not get into debt. But that does not mean that we go ahead and get into debt. It doesn't mean that. Other questions that you can begin to even grapple with and ask yourself is that, never borrow to finance a liability. We know this. Some of this thing is not new to us. But never borrow to finance a liability, because a liability takes off from your pocket. It takes money away from your pocket. And we've talked about, and in fact, I'll even go ahead and say, if the thing that you're borrowing for is not going to repay itself, don't even think about it. If there's no other way that you can find to repay that, don't even think about it. Some of us have justified why we need to get a loan to buy a car. We've even said that, I'll make it to be a cab. But there are so many people, in fact, the financial institutions will tell you there are so many people whose cars are being repossessed in this city because they have failed. Because, in fact, the cab industry has been oversubscribed. And they are struggling. And now they have to look for other options where they can be able to repay or raise money for that. So don't finance, never borrow to finance a liability. But then secondly, never borrow to finance your impatience. And the guilty said, for example, you see, the problem with debt is that it tempts us to buy things that we don't even need. It tempts us to buy a bigger house than we can afford in our current state. And here's the reality. Here's what most of us don't know. That the house you rent is very different from the house you want to buy. The house you can be able to rent is very different from the house that you want to buy. We realized this with Lucy a few years back, that, where we want to live, we can afford to pay rent, but we cannot afford to buy. And the challenge with most of us is that we don't want to live in the places where we can afford to buy houses. Some of us even can buy it cash. Some of us probably even have those houses cash, but they are so far away from where you are right now, and you cannot even see yourself living in those places. And we find it difficult. So what do? Many of us take the bull by the horns. And what do? We get into this mortgage. And clearly what we are saying as we are signing those mortgage forms is that, I am willingly signing my life into slavery for the next 20 years. Because it's a mortgage that you cannot even afford, that if anything went wrong and you lost your job or you lost your business, it is the end of you and your family. The borrower is slave to the lender. And Solomon is telling us, be very wary when it comes to debt. Consider your decisions carefully. Here's the other thing about debt. Debt is bred from great intentions. And I find this very interesting. In fact, for me, it occurred to me even just this week. The thing is that unless you're psycho, none of us goes to borrow money from a friend or from the financial institution and they want to just throw it down the drain. Or they want to misuse it. It all begins with good intentions. Maybe for you, it's a loved one who needs special care, special treatment. And you want to borrow so that you can provide for them that special medical care. We start with good intentions. Maybe for you, it's a house that you want to buy so that you can give your family a place where they can call home. Maybe for you, it's a car. You want to buy it and you can see it, how it can be a blessing, not just to you, but even to the many who are around you, including your friends and family. And some of us even justify, and you're like, it will even be involved in ministry. Hallelujah. The Lord, you can use this car however you want it. We start with good intentions. The schools that we go to, the reason why you've taken a loan so that you can go to school is so that you can better yourself, and maybe you can become, you can advance in your career and you'll get more income and you can probably even live. We have good intentions. The investments, the businesses that we want to get into. So you guys get the drift. But here's the thing. debt also has a way of taking those good intentions and trapping us with them. Because it is very enticing. And the thing that it is enticing because you can see your problem solved on the other end. Before you borrow, you can see that once I borrow, you can see once I invest in this thing or I buy this house, you can see how your problem will be solved on that other end. But then before you know it, and we don't even know when this happens, you are entrapped and now you're a slave living in a posh house, driving a posh car to your earthly master, who you're going to serve. Because in other words, in fact, for you are thinking that you're working, you're advancing your career, but really what you're doing is that you're working for your lender. You're a slave. And many of us are at the place where we struggle with. We are like, you know what? But Pasi, see, it's better for me to be a slave in Runda than to live in Kibera or Kangemi. And that is based on comparison. Nothing bad about Kangemi or Kibera. And some of us, I'm like, let me be a slave in a Range Rover than being in a Vitz or a Honda. Or what are those Uber chap things? What are they called? Suzuki, yeah. Or being in a Suzuki, you're like, let me be a slave in a Range Rover. After all, when I enter there, all my this calm and this peace. Nothing like that. And this happens, we are entrapped into this, and this happens at a macro level, but also at a micro level. I mean, nations, they begin with good intentions. They borrow money. Why? Because they want to improve the infrastructure for the sake of the citizens. They want to make it better for the citizens. But then what ends up happening is that they are unable to pay, and then they become slaves. China has become a great lender to many nations in the past several years. One of those nations is Sri Lanka. What some of us don't know is that they took over the key port in Sri Lanka just recently because Sri Lanka was unable to pay their debt. Do you know that China owns 60% of the Zambia broadcasting network? And over and above that, they are threatening to take over their international airport, Kenneth Kaunda International Airport, if Zambia does not pay their debt in the stipulated time. Borrower is slave to the lender. In Kenya, they basically own the SGR. Let me leave that there. The borrower is slave to the lender. And the enticing does not stop there. Because when you feel like you're managing, and this happens at a macro and micro level, think about yourself. When you think that you're managing the debt, what tends to happen is you go for more. Debt multiplies. In fact, debt multiplies. We've seen that even in our country. You have been making your repayments in a consistent base, so you're like, I can actually get more money so that I can be able to do more. But then it's enticing you and it's entrapping you because before you know it, you are the place where you cannot even be able to handle the debt that you have. And even when you feel good that you have an asset, and by the way, this is actually a sermon that I was preaching even to myself. Because like, even when you feel like you have an asset and your piece of paper has your name on it, really? It's your lender who owns it indirectly, right? Because anything that might happen, it will force you either to sell that asset so that you can pay them back, or they can actually come, if you've used that as collateral, they can come and take it away. The borrower is slave to the lender. And that is why the wealthiest man who ever lived writes this to us, and he says, don't allow yourself to willingly become a slave. Don't live lives of slavery. The borrower is slave to the lender. And guys, I can even end this message here and we can walk away because we get the point. But the other thing that for me, which is critical for those of us, especially who have a relationship with God, and I realize this, and for me it was a strong conviction, is that debt also affects our faith in God. Let me say it this way. Could it be that the struggle with whether to borrow or not, it is not a struggle of what I want to have or what I want to be in the future. It is a struggle of what I have in me. Let me say it differently. Our desire and our belief in borrowing is not driven necessarily with the things that I want, but it is driven by my unbelief in God. that I've gotten to the place where I don't trust that God will come through for me. I don't have faith that God will come through for me. And I'm speaking especially to those of us who borrow to finance our impatience and even our liability. But also for some of us who are at the place where you're in a dire situation, I'll also ask you to go back and check. Please go back and check. Go back and check, because you never know. Maybe have you given God the opportunity to come through for you? Could it be that our borrowing is driven more by our unbelief in God, that He can take care of us? And that has affected our faith. Could it be that Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 6 from verse 24, and it says this: no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? And he continues on, I think to verse 30, where he keeps on talking and affirming the fact that God will take care of us. If God can take care of the wild animals, if God can take care of the birds, what about you who is special to God? Won't God take care of you? The borrower is slave to the lender. But then what I find is that debt not only affects even our relationship with our faith with God, it also makes us self-centered and selfish. Let me explain that. Rarely do you find people, anyone who is a slave, if you're a slave, rarely do you think how you can help another slave get out of slavery first before you. We think about, it is me first, then I can help the rest. And we become so focused in pleasing the master and the lender that we fail to be a blessing to others. And yet this is the God-given purpose that God has for us, that God has given you and I, and He's blessed you with everything that we need on this earth so that we can be a blessing to others. We have many rich people in this city, rich quote unquote, in this city, who cannot help even their family members, let alone even friends. Why? It is not because they don't want to, it is because they cannot, because they are borrowed up all the way to their noses. Our African nations are in a place where they can't even help each other because they are all so focused in trying to pay their debt. So there's no way Kenya is going to help Uganda, or is going to be thinking about Zambia right now. They need to think about even just how they can get themselves out of slavery, and we are all in this rat race. We are focused in getting out of this rat race. And what ends up happening is that now, and we've seen this even in our continent, what have we done is that now we've looked to the east, and we are hoping that there's a light that is going to come from the east and shine on our supposedly dark continent. And what we fail to realize that what we need to do is maybe you and I need to shine our light and show the world that this continent is not just a potential, but we can actually be the richest continent in the world. Because God has given us everything that we need. We have everything that we need in this country. And of course, some of us, this thought is difficult for many of us to comprehend, because you're so focused right now on where you are. And that's my point in terms of selfishness. You can't even think about how I can be a blessing to the brother who's sitting or the sister who's sitting next to you, because according to you, you're so in. In fact, you are so in that there's absolutely no way. You just need room to breathe, and when you breathe, you go back in. And this is the kind of life that we are living. And I say to us that we can work to lift each other up and support one another, and that will protect us from becoming slaves. In fact, when you read Deuteronomy chapter 15 verse 6, you find that there was a promise that God gave to the nation of Israel. And He said this: for the Lord your God will bless you as He has promised, and you will lend to many nations but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations but none will rule over you. And this is a blessing that He gave to the nation of Israel. And the thing about it is that, what it means is that they had more than enough for their people, but also for the people who are outsiders. And God promises that indeed they will rule over the nations, meaning they had more than enough. And imagine with me, Mavuno, imagine with me if families will begin to put aside their differences and work together for the family win. Then some of us don't even have to end up in slavery or in debt if we begin to work together. And I've seen this in my family. I've seen it, that when we come together and we work together, some of us come in healthy families where you have worked together, and none of you is in slavery, none of you is in debt, and I commend you for that. But if we put aside our differences, if tribes, for God's sake, we can put aside our selfish differences and say, let's work together to build this economy. Because when we prosper, when we as a community prosper, I prosper. When we prosper, you prosper in whatever it is that you're doing. And many of us are selfishly thinking about ourselves. And what you're failing to realize is that, it will not help you to get to where you're going faster. What it will do is that it will grind all of us to a halt. That when you decide that, I will not even help my family. Guess what? God forbid, when something like sickness checks in, you're pulled back to where you started. But when we begin to see that we can work together, tribes working together and supporting each other for the common good of everyone, when we come together as family members, when we come together as Mavunites, when we come together as the fearless tribe, saying we shall be a generous people who will solve the problems of my country so that we may leave a prosperous inheritance for our children's children. For some of us, this may sound like an audacious dream, but it will come to reality because you and I will engage in it. If we who are the fearless begin to see ourselves as a solution to someone else's problem, then we don't have to end up in slavery. I believe that God's desire is for everyone in this church to be debt free. You missed a very good point to say amen. Because God realized, He knows that the minute you engage in debt, you become a slave of someone else. And you miss out on the God-given purpose that He has given to you. So yes, we can argue about whether it's right or wrong for me to borrow. But consider carefully your thoughts, that you're not enslaving yourself so that you miss what God wants for you. And I've seen many people be diverted, from their God-given purpose because they are so focused on meeting the requirements of their lenders that they are willing to compromise their relationship with God. We know many people who right now, even if you try to tell them, come and serve in church, they can't because they don't even have the time. Come and give, spread the love. They don't even have the time. Why? Because we become a slave to the lenders. And God is saying, don't be enslaved. Don't be enslaved. I came so that you may have freedom. And you find this in Galatians where He said, don't be yoked or burdened by a yoke of slavery. You find that in the book of Christ came so that we may have freedom. And we may stand in freedom because He has given us everything to be economically free. And the words of a famous poet by the name of Bob, we must emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. But also the words of the greatest teacher who ever lived on this earth. You should know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Mavuno, it's very easy for us to walk out of this place and say, that was a good sermon. The reality is, I still have bills to pay. So, Pastor, I hear you, but I have bills to pay. It is okay for me to be a slave now, because hopefully I'll get out of this in the future. Could it be that you're missing what God wants to do through you, what God wants to do for you? And many of us, it has affected our faith in God because we haven't given God an opportunity to say yes. I think it's the words of Philippians that I will bless you, I will give you according to my riches in glory. Could it be that we have refused or denied God the opportunity to be a blessing to us? And in other words, we have willingly allowed ourselves to be slaves. The borrower is slave to the lender.